Shalom, my name is Todd Bennett, and I'd like to welcome you to this newest installment of the Leaving Babylon series. In the last couple episodes, we talked about the Sabbath, and I recommended that you begin to observe the Sabbath as one of the first things you do when you leave the organized church structure. Get away from all the noise and hustle and bustle of organized religion, and in the still and quiet and peace of the Sabbath that you begin to learn his ways and hear his voice and just get to know Elohim anew. And it's an opportunity to learn to practice to be set apart once a week. And the last episode we talked about some of the various commandments concerning the Sabbath. And one thing I didn't mention was that by last count, Rabbinic Judaism had 1,537 man-made rules and regulations concerning the Sabbath. And of course that just reinforces the fact as why I recommended that we don't look to Rabbinic Judaism as our guide to observe the Torah, because we actually saw that the commandments distill down to around 7 actual commandments concerning the Sabbath, and with a potential 8th commandment that we find in the prophecy of Ezekiel, which essentially shows us the fulfillment of the Sabbath and what it's really meant to be. So with this installment, I'd like to continue with our conversation of learning to be set apart. And this commandment that I want to talk about today actually involves the Sabbath indirectly. We read in Numbers 15:38, "Speak to the children of Israel and tell them to make tassels on the corners of their garments throughout their generations, and to put a cord of blue on the tassel of each corner." Now you might ask yourself, well, what does this have to do with the Sabbath? Well, the answer is clear when we put the commandment in its proper context, and we read its context from the preceding sentences in Numbers 15:32 through 36. It says, "While the children of Israel were in the wilderness, they found a man gathering sticks on the Sabbath." See? "And those who found him gathering sticks brought him to Moshe and Aharon and to all the congregation. They put him in custody because it had not been made clear what should be done to him. And Yahuwah spoke to Moshe, or he said to Moshe, the man shall be put to death. All the congregation shall stone him with stones outside the camp. And all the congregation brought him outside the camp and stoned him to death with stones, as Yahuwah commanded Moshe." So immediately after we read about this breaking the Sabbath and the stoning event, that's when we read the commandment concerning wearing the tassels with a thread of blue. And of course the Hebrew word for tassels is tzitzit. Now then, after the commandment, the text reveals the purpose of wearing the tzitzit, and that's found in Numbers 15:39. "And it shall be a tzitzit for you to look at and remember all the commandments of Yahuwah, to do them, not to follow after your heart and your own eyes, which you are inclined to whore after." So again, the word for tassels is tzitzit, and it means a lock or a fringe. And it's actually the plural of tzitz, which means a flower or a wing. So the full commandment concerning the tzitzit in Numbers reads again, "Yahuwah spoke to Moshe, saying, Speak to the children of Israel, tell them to make tzitzit on the corners of their garments throughout their generations, and to put a blue thread in the tzitzit of the corners. And you shall have the tzitzit that you may look upon it and remember all the commandments of Yahuwah and do them, and that you may not follow the harlotry to which your own heart and your own eyes are inclined, and that you may remember and do all my commandments, and be set apart for your Elohim." And verse 41 says, "I am Yahuwah your Elohim, who brought you out of the land of Egypt to be your Elohim. I am Yahuwah your Elohim." So the commandments to wear the tzitzit with the thread of blue is so that we can look upon it, we can remember the commandments, and we can do the commandments and be set apart. And it's a constant visual reminder to help us to be set apart. Now, it's very significant to note that the commandment that we read in Numbers ends with the first commandment that was given at Mount Sinai. I am Yahuwah your Elohim, who brought you out of the land of Egypt. We read about that in Exodus 22. So it's as if Yahuwah was saying, all right, you messed up my Sabbath here. We're going to do a reset here. I'm going to have you wear these tzitzit so that you can look upon them and remember them. And we're going to start over. Commandment 1, I am Yahuwah your Elohim who brought you out of the land of Egypt. So it was almost like a reset, and these tzitzit are integral for us to learning and obeying and remembering the commandments. Now, we also read a commandment concerning the tassels in Deuteronomy 22:12. It says, you shall make yourself tassels on the four corners of the garment with which you cover yourself. Okay, so now let's place this one in its context. In Deuteronomy 22:10, we read, you shall not plow with an ox and a donkey together. In Deuteronomy 22:11, we read, you shall not wear cloth of wool and linen together. So what we see here is the context involves a preclusion against mixing. And of course, the Torah is all about learning distinctions, holy and not holy, clean and unclean, right and wrong, righteousness and evil. That's what the Torah is all about. That's what these instructions are about. So we can learn how to be holy as Elohim is holy. And it's all about our training for the kingdom. And so being set apart and living a set apart walk involves learning these distinctions and acting upon them. Once we learn them, we're supposed to be doing them. And so the purpose of learning the distinctions of mixing involves all sorts of areas of our daily life. Now, it's interesting that this text in Deuteronomy doesn't use the word tzitzit. We read tassels in the English, and we would expect to see tzitzit in the Hebrew, but we don't. We actually read the word gadolim, and gadolim is plural for gadol, which literally means to grow up, to become great, magnified, or high. In fact, one of the most common usages that we have is, the Kohen Hagadol, the high priest. And so by the use of this word gadol, referring to the tassel, the tzitzit, it's essentially elevating our clothing through the tzitzit. And so now it becomes like a priestly garment that we're wearing. And of course, that's completely consistent with our calling. If we're in the covenant assembly of Israel, we read about in Exodus 19:6, and you shall be to me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. These are the words which you shall speak to the children of Israel. So, these tzitzit are pretty important for us in fulfilling this role of being a priestly nation. Now, both the Numbers and Deuteronomy passages provide that the tzitzit are to be worn on the four corners of our garments. And the Hebrew word for corner is kanaf. Now that's very significant because it reminds us of a powerful Messianic prophecy that we read about in Malachi. In Malachi 4:2 we read, but to you who fear my name, the Son of Righteousness shall arise with healing in his wings, and you shall go out and grow fat like stall-fed calves. Now here the Hebrew word for wings is kanaf. And it means, again, a border, a corner, a wing of a garment, which is a reference to the tzitzit. So this prophecy is stating that the Son of Righteousness, the Messiah, would come with healing in his tzitzit. And now we know that this was absolutely what happened with Yeshua the Messiah, as the New Testament scriptures provide on several occasions. Matthew 9:20, and suddenly a woman who had a flow of blood for 12 years came from behind and touched the hem of his garment. Now the hem of his garment was his tzitzit. In Matthew 14:36 we read that they begged him that they might only touch the hem of his garment. And as many as touched it were made perfectly well. Again, the hem of his garment was the kanaf, the tzitzit. In Mark 6:56 we read, wherever he entered, into villages, cities, or the country, they laid the sick in the marketplace and begged him that they might just touch the hem of his garment. And as many as touched him were made well. Again, the hem of his garment was the kanaf, the tzitzit. So Yeshua was clearly obeying the commandments. He was wearing tzitzit, and through his obedience, he actually fulfilled the prophecy in Malachi that there would be healing in his tzitzit. And of course, that leads to those that believe in Yeshua HaMashiach, those that follow him. Should they be wearing tzitzit? And of course, the answer is absolutely yes. He came and provided the example. He was the Word in the flesh. He came against all the religious leaders, the Pharisees, the Sadducees, those that were adding to and taking from the commandments. These very same people who were, hundreds and hundreds of commandments concerning the Sabbath. Yeshua said, take my yoke upon you and learn from me. And he said he'd give us rest. And of course, we see the distinction between, 7 commandments in the Torah and over 1,000 commandments that the Rabbinic Judaism has come up with. So Yeshua was coming against these religious systems and all their takanot and masim, their rules and regulations, their traditions that they've added and treated as commandments. And he said, follow me. Obey as I obey. And so just as he obeyed by wearing the tzitzit, we should be obeying and wearing tzitzit with a thread of blue. Now, how do we wear the tzitzit? Well, some people decide to wear a prayer shawl, which has 4 corners and has a tzitzit on each corner. That's great, and I have no problem with people praying with prayer shawls on, to obey that commandment and have that 4-cornered garment on them. But I think this is something we're supposed to be doing constantly. So I wear what's called a talit katan. It's an undergarment. It's like an undershirt, but it's got 4 corners on it, so I can wear my tzitzit all the time. And again, that's the purpose, is being a priestly people and a set-apart people. We're supposed to have that commandment all the time. We're supposed to have that reminder all the time of the commandments. So I highly recommend, you work something out that you have a 4-cornered garment, and you can put the tzitzit on each corner of your garment. Now, I'm often asked the question, can women wear tzitzit? And of course, the scriptures, just on a superficial reading in Numbers 15:38, it says, speak to the Beni Yisrael, which Beni is literally sons, but it's often translated as children of Israel. And that's very appropriate because many times there's a reference to Beni Israel, and it's clearly talking about all of Israel. So I don't think you can just apply this exclusively to males. And of course, what is the purpose of the tzitzit? It's to remind us of his commandments. And of course, women are supposed to obey the commandments just as much as men are. Many people make the argument that, well, if they're under the covering of their husband, as long as their husband wears the tzitzit. But honestly, we all walk out our separate walks individually, and we're responsible for what we do. And if a woman wants to wear that reminder of the commandments and a reminder to be set apart, then I think she's perfectly capable of doing so, and it's well within, the Torah for her to do so. And so as long as she has a 4-cornered garment, I would certainly say no problem with her wearing the tzitzit on those 4 corners, just like men do. So again, it's a constant reminder, and it's a sign. It's a sign to people that we are in this covenant relationship, just as the Sabbath is a sign that we are in covenant with the Elohim of Yisrael. And it also demonstrates that we're diligently obeying the commandments in the Torah over to the traditions of men when we have this blue thread. And I bring that up because if anybody's familiar with Orthodox Judaism, you would recognize that most Orthodox Jews do not have the blue thread. Most of them have just the white thread. Now, the reason for that is they have a tradition of regarding the techelet. Now, that's the word for blue that we read in Numbers 15:38. It's techelet. And we first read about this techelet in Exodus 25:4 when it refers to the gifts of blue, purple, and scarlet thread, fine linen, and goat's hair for the tabernacle, among other things. And it's repeatedly mentioned when it refers to the tabernacle and the blue in the tabernacle. It was also used for the garments of the high priest, and we read about that in Exodus 39:1, of the blue tchelet, purple and scarlet thread, they made garments of ministry for ministering in the holy place, and made the holy garments for Aharon, as Yahuwah had commanded Moses. He made the ephod of gold, blue tchelet, purple and scarlet thread, and of fine woven linen. So the word tchelet is generally associated with a very rich blue or violet color. Now, the Orthodox Jews have a tradition that the source of the tchelet was from a mussel that became extinct. So because the mussel was extinct, they simply stopped using the color and stopped wearing a blue thread in their tzitzit. Now, it's interesting because they've found this mussel again, and it's actually not extinct. So some have begun to wear the blue thread again in their tzitzit, but most still continue to wear just the white. And that's a powerful example of tradition and how many people just get stuck with their tradition, and it's hard to change even when they're given this opportunity. So their tradition kind of put them into a dilemma because they believe they could only put the blue thread if it came from this mussel. And now that it's available, now that they realize it's not extinct, so many people still fail to obey the commandment. And again, it's the power of tradition over the actual commandments. And so this is another good example of why we can't really look to Pharisaic Judaism for our halakha, our walk, how we walk out the Torah, because they so often choose their traditions over the Torah. In fact, Yeshua actually commented on the Pharisees missing the point of wearing the tzitzit in Matthew 23:5 when he said, "But all the works they do to be seen by men, they make their phylacteries broad and enlarge the borders of their garments." And again, the borders of their garments were the tzitzit that they were wearing. And instead of using the tzitzit to remember the commandments and be humble and set apart, they were using the tzitzit as a status symbol, and they enlarged them and they made them big, and prominent so people would notice them. And so they missed the point entirely, and they do the same with the blue. They get so caught up with their tradition concerning the source of the color that they end up forgetting and ignoring the actual color that's a commandment and a sign. So instead of having the blue in there as is commanded, they'd rather not have the blue because they follow their tradition of the source of the blue. So again, we have to make sure that when we begin this journey out of Babylon, that we remain focused on the purity and the simplicity of the Torah and don't get caught up in all sorts of traditions and man-made rules and regulations that become a distraction to our obedience and the real purpose of the commandments. So, we started this journey with the simplicity of the Sabbath, and we now see that being set apart is not just confined to a once-a-week exercise, but it actually is that Shabbat is a preparation point for a week of being set apart in everything that we do. And being set apart is something that we should be thinking about and doing constantly. It permeates every part of our lives, even down to what we wear, as we've just seen. And the next time we'll discuss other aspects of being set apart, including what we eat. So I hope you enjoyed this teaching and learned something from it, and I look forward to bringing you more information in subsequent teachings. And until next time, my name is Todd Bennett from ShemaYisrael.net. Shalom.